let's come together this morning. This morning we're going to talk about the law of attraction. The law of attraction. I know you've all probably at least heard of, if not seen, the movie that was popular a few years ago, maybe somewhere between 5 and 10 years ago. It's still available out there on the internet somewhere. You can watch it. It's kind of interesting, Dr. Holmes wrote his first books in 1919, and he wasn't the first one to discuss this. There were others before him, and and now in the 21st century we have movies about it. But we want to stop and consider, what is this thing? What is this thing called the law of attraction? What is this? When we were first beginning our studies in Science of Mind, Lori and I, we were going through, and there are many different books, there are many different teachers, there's many different talks, there's just all kinds of references, even within Dr. Holmes' work, to these different laws. There's a law of mind, there's a law of attraction. This morning as I was reading, I found a new one to me, the law of faith and acceptance. We have the law of health and the law of prosperity, and all these different things. It makes you wonder, well, are there many, many different laws, or is there just one law that we describe in many different ways? As I said in the opening treatment, there's one ocean in the world, there's one world ocean. But yet, depending on which shore we're standing on, which direction we're facing, we call it by different names. In New York we look out and we say, well, it's the Atlantic. But in California we look out and say, well, it's the Pacific. And in Italy we look out and say, well, no, it's the Mediterranean. See, but it's just one ocean, just one ocean. And I'd like you to consider with me today that there's just one law. There's just one law. But we call it by different names depending upon how we are trying to use it at that moment in time. If we are consciously and deliberately, and as Dr. Holmes says in these chapters of the textbook, which are mental equivalence and law of attraction, if we use it consciously and aggressively, and I thought that was an interesting word. I know that I've seen it before in that chapter, but it just jumped out at me. Aggressively, what does that mean, aggressively? To me it means like you won't let go. If you remember in the Old Testament theology, there was I think it was Jacob who wrestled with the angel all night long and wouldn't let go of the angel until it gave him the blessing. And when it did, it so changed him that his name became Israel. Right? And angels in the metaphoric language of that culture, angels are divine ideas. Right? So have you ever been up all night wrestling with an idea? Then you start to get a different context. Right? So when we were kids, we probably had this idea of a human being somehow engaged in a wrestling match with an angel. But there was something going on. See, Spirit was moving him. The divine was moving him. He had this idea, and he couldn't let it go. He just couldn't let it go. He wouldn't let it go. He held on to it, you see. And he says, I'm not going to let you go. I'm not going to give up and go to sleep until I get it, until I receive the blessing. And he wrestled with this angel. He wrestled with this divine idea. To me, that's being aggressive. Right? It's not being a bully. It's saying, this is what I shall have. And I won't stop until I have it. There's a famous story of Henry Ford when he wanted an 8-cylinder engine for automobiles, and he told his engineers to go to work and figure out how to do it. And they worked for about 6 months, and he checked in with them, and they said they couldn't figure it out. And he said, go back to work on it because that's what I want, and I'll have it. And they went back to work, and he went back after another 6 months, and he said, how are you making out? And they said, well, we still haven't figured out how to do it. And he said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, either you figure out how to do it, or I'm going to go hire some people who will, because I'm going to have that engine. So you either make up your minds that you're going to be the ones that develop it, or I'm going to go get other people to do it. Very aggressive, very clear. He knew what he wanted. And of course, they had their breakthrough, and they designed it in the form of the V8 engine that we know today. So perhaps aggressive is persistent. Perhaps aggressive is not settling. Not settling. I hear that. I hear that a lot. But we shouldn't settle. We don't have to settle. There's a story I was sharing with someone not too long ago of out of the Silmar. A lady was telling of meeting Dr. Holmes and his wife. And this lady had a fake boa, a fake fur boa, and she was just kind of showing it off. And she said to Mrs. Holmes, she says, I'm having just as much fun with this as if it was real. And Mrs. Holmes said, well, that's exactly why it's not. It's exactly why it's not. She settled for the fake boa. And I realize that fur is not in vogue any longer. It was in those days. People did those things. My point is simply this: is what is it that we are willing to latch onto and not let go of? What is it that we are willing to hold on to? The Buddha, we're told, tried many different ways to reach enlightenment. And finally he sat down under the Bodhi tree and he said, here I stay. This is where I'll sit. I'm not going to leave. I'm either going to get it or I'm going to die right here. I'm not going to give up. And it was while sitting there that the legend has it that a raft was going down the river, and on the raft was a music teacher and a student. And the music teacher was explaining to the student how to tune the string. And the music teacher said, now if you tune it too tight, it'll break. And if you tune it too loosely, it won't play right. You need to find the middle. And that's when Buddha had his enlightenment. And that's why Buddhism was called the middle way. He wasn't going to leave that spot until he got it. He was going to wrestle with his angel until he got the blessing. So where we're going with this today is we want to talk about this one law that takes many different names depending upon how we use it. Dr. Holmes called it the law of mind with a capital M. And I think that's kind of too abstract for people. What does that mean? What does law of mind mean? That sounds kind of esoteric, and we don't know what that means. What is mind anyway? What is consciousness? What is thought? We start to get into the really deeper questions of life that we do need to ask and answer as we grow. But as a starting place, it's perhaps too generic a statement, law of mind. So people tend to name it something that makes particular sense to them, specific sense to them in the instance that they're working. So if they're treating for health, if they want to have a different experience of health in their lives, they might say, well, I'm working with the law of health. If they're treating for a different experience with supply in their lives, they might say, well, I'm working with the law of prosperity. If they are treating for their significant other to show up in their lives, their soulmate, their spouse, they might say, well, I'm working with the law of relationships. But in fact, we're working with the same law. There's only one law. It's kind of like energy, it's the laws of physics tell us that energy can be changed, but it can neither be created nor destroyed. So we have water, that is flowing down the river, and it turns the mechanical device in the generating plant. And that mechanical device changes the energy of the flowing water into electricity. And then the electricity comes to our home, and it powers the well, and the well pumps water back out of the ground, and the water flows down the curb and goes into the storm drain and goes back into the river. So there's one energy. There's one energy, but it takes different forms. We can use it for heating our homes. We can use it for cooling our homes. We can use it for powering our lights. We can do many different things with it. So when we're using it as electricity, we might call it the laws of electricity. When we're using it with heat, we might call it, the laws or the principles of thermodynamics and those sorts of things. So just, if you will, keep in mind that the essence of what we're talking about the law of attraction, there's this one law, Now, years ago, I was reading a book by a gentleman named Alan Cohen. He was a very popular author and speaker at that time, probably the early 90s, I would say. And the name of the book that I was reading is called Joy is My Compass. It's a very delightful book. Each chapter was only 3 or 4 pages long, and his style of writing was he usually started with a little anecdote, something that we can all relate to. And then he would kind of expound on the spiritual principles that the anecdote revealed, the parable, if you want to call it that, reveal. And then kind of show us how we could use those same principles in our lives. So the story that I remember is that some of his friends wanted to go horseback riding, and he was living in Hawaii at the time. And he said he really wasn't a big fan of horseback riding, but he wanted to be polite to his friends, so he agreed to go along with them. And when they showed up at the stables and they all got on their horses, the guide started leading them out. He found out that they were going to ride up the side of the volcano. There was a volcanic mountain nearby, and they were going to go up a trail. And he didn't like that idea at all. He wasn't too fond of horses to begin with, but heights and steep places he was even less fond of. So on the way up, he was very anxious as they were going up. He was watching the trail ahead of them and watching where the horse was going to place its feet, and he was just very concerned about being on this moving animal and going up a steep trail along the side of a volcano. But he was able to contain his fear. He was able to not let it show to his friends. For them, he put on the pretense of enjoying himself. And when they got up to the top where they were going, there was a little flat place, and they got up there, and he said you could look out and you could see it was just absolutely gorgeous, and you can imagine the scene, the white clouds in the baby blue sky over the blue Pacific Ocean, just absolutely gorgeous. The cool breeze was blowing, and he said he had been sweating. He was so afraid, and the breeze was kind of cooling him off. And the guide said, "How'd everybody do on the way up?" And he said, "Well, did okay. Yeah, it was okay." And the guy said, "Well, good. We're going to go back down the other way, which was a little bit steeper." And he said, then his panic really started to set in. He thought the way up was steep enough, but the way down was going to be even steeper. And his heart started to pound in his chest, and as the horse kind of leaned down the hill, the trail just seemed so much narrower than it really should be. And he looked over the side, and there was nothing to the side but a steep slope covered with vegetation. And he looked over to the other side, and there was nothing there but kind of like the side of the mountain, and this trail was just somehow carved into it. And he began to really, really get frightened, and he thought he was going to faint, and he was going to fall off the horse, and he was just going to roll down the side of the mountain, and he would be killed, and all of these terrible fears kept going through his head. And he said finally he got a hold of himself. Finally he stopped. And he realized that all of his other friends were just thoroughly enjoying themselves. And the reason he wasn't enjoying himself was he was experiencing fear. And he asked himself this question that he suggested to us later in the chapter, that this is the question, or a question, that we should consider asking ourselves. What would I be experiencing right now if I weren't, and then fill in the blank, if I weren't afraid, if I weren't tired, if I weren't angry? But in his case, it was fear. What would I be experiencing right now if I knew this horse would not fall down? What would I be experiencing now if I knew this horse would not fall down? And he said if he knew the horse wouldn't fall down, why, he would be taking in the beauty. He would be looking at the ocean. He would be looking at the clouds. He would be seeing the soaring birds, over the forest as they hunted for their lunch. He'd be listening to the sound of the birds. He'd be feeling the breeze, maybe even see a whale or two as they swam by the island. He said when he started to focus on the good and the beauty and the possibility of experiencing the beauty that was there, then the fear started to subside. The fear started to subside. So what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? What would you do if you knew the horse you were riding on wouldn't fall down? When I was a kid growing up, there was times that kids have big ideas and big dreams and want to do this and want to do that. And my mom always had a way of kind of bringing you back to reality. And she says, "So what? You think you have a rich uncle?" And she'd laugh. And that was a way of saying, where do you think the money is going to come from to do this? How do you think you're going to be able to do this? And if you stop and think back, a lot of the comic books and cartoons and things that were playing for kids at the time had this theme of a rich uncle or a rich benefactor who was taking care of them, right? Daddy Warbucks was taking care of Annie. There was a cartoon character called Richie Rich, where he was a little boy who had all the money in the world because his parents were rich and all these things. But there was this idea, the idea in the consciousness at the time that if you were going to experience more good than your present station or present position in life was affording you, well, the only way that you were going to do it is that you had to have some type of a benefactor. You had to have a rich uncle, And of course, the other stories were the Horatio Alger stories, which were pull yourself up by the bootstraps and become rich through your own efforts, through your own struggles, through your own success. But what if you knew you had a rich uncle? What if you knew that you had a benefactor? What if you knew that there was a power in the universe that would not only keep your horse from falling down, but would come to your aid and would come to help you and would support you and love you in whatever it is that you choose to do? And I think that's the way that we should approach the law of mind. That's the way that we should approach the law of attraction. There is a power in the universe, very simply, to put it very simply, what we're talking about is it is done unto you according to your belief. There is a power in the universe that responds to you according to your belief and does whatever needs must be in order for the perfect outpicturing of whatever you believe, the perfect outpicturing to appear in your life. I can't say it any simpler than that. It's done unto you according to your belief. Well, if it's done unto us according to our belief, and it doesn't matter whether it is what we consciously believe or subjectively believe down in the subconscious, the things that we believe but we don't quite know that we believe them. If it's done unto us according to our belief, then there's no reason to fall down. There's no reason to remain in the station in life into which we find ourselves. See, there's kind of a struggle that we go through. There's a belief in human consciousness and race consciousness that says, I am the way that I am, or I experience the things that I experience because that's who I am. And I can't change the way that I am. That's the way that I am. So then I must continue to experience the same things over and over and over again. And I would change that. I would say, no, you're not. The experience that you have is not a result of who you are as much as they are a result of what you believe. You might argue and say, well, who I am is a result of what I believe. But the belief is the root cause. And then the question becomes, well, who is it? Who is it that can change your belief? Who is it that can change my belief? Can my fairy godmother come and wave the magic wand and poof, my beliefs are all changed? Can my minister talk to me and my beliefs are changed? Can my parents, can my spouse, can my friends change my beliefs? No one can change our beliefs but our own selves. So we have this power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. And it is perfectly ready, willing, and able to do whatever needs must be to produce the circumstances in our lives that we desire. But we must work with it according to the way that it works. And this is the same power that when we're told in the creation myths of different cultures, not just in the book of Genesis, but that's probably the one our culture is most familiar with, is that God spoke its word and spoke it for a very specific purpose. God said, let there be light, which in that culture meant enlightenment, wisdom. Right? Let there be an awakening. Let there be stars and planets. Let there be plants and animals. Let there be people made in our image and likeness. Now, of course, that didn't literally happen, but the authors are trying to explain to us the creative process. The universe we live in is a spiritual system. The activity of spirit is thought, mental activity. The divine mind decides what it will have. It declares that it shall have it, and at that point, something acting as blind force, the Holy Spirit, the doer of the word, something acting as blind force, takes over and brings into actual demonstration, into actual creation, the perfect equivalent, the perfect outpicturing of the mental equivalent. Very important point to consider here is this power, this blind force, the law of mind that Dr. Holmes tells us about. It doesn't change things. Consider a seed. You know, you go out into your garden and you take a seed. Whatever that seed might be, it might be a flowering plant or it might be a vegetable. But when you put that seed in the ground, there is something that knows what to do. You might want to consider it an intelligence that exists. Even at the chemical level, there's an intelligence that exists. There's something that is acting appropriately in order to take that seed and bring it into the plant, and then bring it into the blossom, and then bring it into the flower, or bring it into the fruit of the vegetable. Now, if you put a tomato seed in the ground, you get a tomato plant. You don't put a tomato seed in the ground and get a carrot. The power, the blind force, the soil of the universe does not say, oh, no, tomatoes are no good for you. You don't like tomatoes. There's too much acid in tomatoes for you. You can't have those. I'm going to give you cucumbers that are a little bit milder. The law does not question. It responds exactly according to our belief. Our belief is the seed. Our belief is the seed that we sow into the soil. The soul of the universe, the soil of the universe, the mind of the universe. Dr. Holmes calls it by all these things. And we get back exactly what we put in. Florence Scovel Shinn calls it the game of boomerangs, the game of life and how to play it. She said, life is a game of boomerangs. What you toss out, you get back. The New Testament tells us, cast your bread upon the waters and they shall not and they shall return unto you. And Isaiah in the Old Testament says, my word shall not return unto me void. What you give out is what you get back. Now, what we have to consider is two things. It gives back to us according to the level of clarity of what Dr. Holmes calls the mental equivalent. He says when we use the law, we have to use it specifically for something. I know I must have at one time or another told you the story of Emmett Fox, who came from England, and he came to New York, and he passed a cafeteria in New York. In those days, Horn and Hardouts had a cafeteria on almost every good corner in New York. And Emmett Fox looked in the window and he saw all these people sitting down and eating delightful meals, and he decided that was where he would go eat. But he had never been in a cafeteria before. They didn't have them in England. He didn't understand the concept. So he just went and he sat down at an empty table. And he sat and he sat and he sat, and he was waiting for someone to come and take his order, but no one ever came. Meanwhile, everybody else around him is enjoying this meal. So finally he asked somebody, he said, well, what do I have to do to get service around here? And he pointed to the head of the line, and they said, well, you just go up there and grab your tray and your silverware, and you go through that line and you tell them what you want, and they give it to you, and then you come back and sit down and eat. So he could have sat there forever and gone hungry with all of this good food around him, because he didn't, number one, he didn't know how it worked. And number two, he hadn't been specific. He hadn't gone and told somebody what he wanted. So what Dr. Holmes asks us to consider is this thing called faith. He says faith is what moves the law. Faith is what gets it in motion. And I want you to really be clear on this. The law is always in motion according to your level of faith, and you don't always know what your level of faith is. You believe in things, what is it Stevie Wonder says, you believe in things you don't understand. We believe in things that we don't know we believe in. There's so much in there. Where do these beliefs come from? Where do these ideas come from? And we say, well, gee, I don't remember getting that idea. I don't know what idea I would have that resulted in the financial troubles I'm going through. I don't know what ideas I had that go to the relationship troubles I'm having, or health issues, or all those things. See, we don't know where the ideas come from. Dr. Holmes tells us not to try to figure out where the ideas come from. That's a waste of time, because a lot of times what you're experiencing is a result of a combination of several different things. Now, in our culture, we have this idea. Maybe it comes to us through psychology or psychiatry. I don't know where it comes from, but I do know that people have come to me with this idea that says, if what I'm experiencing right now is a result of what I believe, then I have to go in and find that erroneous belief, and I have to pull it out by the roots. It's like going into your garden and saying, I don't want that. I wanted tomatoes. And grab this thing and pull it out by the roots. And only then can I have a different experience. And that is not only not true, but that is a waste of time. That to me is a diversion. That keeps us from doing the very thing that we ought to be doing to have a different experience. It does not matter where that idea came from. You don't know whether you picked it up somewhere in this lifetime, through an experience you had. You don't know if you picked it up through participation in race consciousness or collective consciousness, as Carl Jung called it. You don't know if you picked it up before you even got here. We're immortal, eternal beings. We were somewhere before we got here. We're going to be somewhere after we leave here. You don't know how long you've been. If I say how old are you, and you tell me in terms of days and years from the time you were born here, but that's only here. Where were you before you got here? So the idea then that I have to find this erroneous idea and dig it up, because if it's done unto me according to my belief, and I'm not having the experience that I would really like to have, there must be some erroneous belief that's getting in the way then somehow I have to get rid of that erroneous belief. And that part is true. You do have to get rid of it. But identifying it and digging it up and trying to squirt it with weed killer and throw it onto the fire, none of that is necessary. And here's what Dr. Holmes tells us. In order to cancel out the negative beliefs, you just pour positive beliefs into your consciousness. The positive beliefs then have the effect of rubbing out the negative belief as you would rub out a chalk mark, or these days a dry erase mark, on a whiteboard. Get that picture in your head. Get that eraser going, washing away, rubbing away all of the erroneous beliefs, all of the erroneous ideas. If you have a glass of clear water and you pour ink into it, the ink kind of goes all through the water, right? All of the water changes to some tint of that ink. The ink just doesn't lay down the bottom somewhere. It kind of dilutes in there. And now you look at that and you say, well, my goodness, well, who put the ink in there? Well, I put the ink in there. That's not important. The thing is, well, how are you going to get rid of it? Right? Well, can you just kind of reach in there and grab the ink and pull it out? You can't do that. It's part of the water now. The erroneous ideas are part of your consciousness. But what you can do is you can take the water and you can put it underneath a tap of slowly running clear water. And as you allow clear water to go into that glass, the ink gets more and more and more diluted till eventually, over time, with consistency, with aggressive pursuit, the water turns clear again. Another way that he puts it is, if you go into a room and the room is dark, it doesn't matter how long it's been dark. It doesn't matter who turned out the lights. None of that matters. Light the candle. Light the candle. The instant you light the candle, the darkness is gone. And there's no struggle. See, the darkness is not a power to sustain itself. The darkness is a condition. The darkness is an appearance. The darkness is a result of the light having been blocked. Once you reintroduce the light or remove the blockage, if you go into the room and throw back the curtains, the darkness just disappears without a struggle, because it was never a real power in the first place. So consider that as we go through this life, however long that has been, right? This our life, that we have allowed or adopted many ideas and beliefs of things that are just not true. And because there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief, the sum total of our experience then is an outpicturing of our belief. And if we wish to have a different experience, we need to change our beliefs. And the way that we change our beliefs and the way that we build up faith is by pouring positive ideas into our consciousness to nullify, to dilute, to erase any negative ideas we have. So here's how this works, right? So, and you've seen it. I know that you've seen it. Somebody has a job and they don't like the job, and they don't like the way the boss treats them, and they don't like the way the co-workers treat them, and they don't like the way the customers treat them, so they quit. They quit and they go someplace else and they get another job. And at first everything is wonderful, And within a few months, suddenly the new job looks exactly like the old job. The boss is treating this person the same way the old boss did. The co-workers are treating them the same way the old co-workers did. The customers are just as surly as they used to be over at the old place. Well, what happened? See, this individual took their consciousness with them. No matter where you go, there you are. They took their consciousness with them. People go into a relationship, and they have a relationship, and at first it seems wonderful, and then after a while things go sour. And they decide, well, I know what the problem with this relationship is. The problem with the relationship is this other person. No, they're just not right for me. So they end that relationship, and after a while they enter into a new relationship. And guess what? After a while, spouse number 2 seems an awful lot like spouse number 1. They took their consciousness with them from one relationship to another. So the only way to make a permanent and lasting change in our lives is to change our consciousness. Now we can go in there and we can fight and struggle and try to make things happen. If we don't have enough money in our lives, we can figure out how to go hustle and get more. But sooner or later, we'll lose it again, because we can only hold on to it as long as we through willpower struggle and force it to be so. And this is not about struggling and forcing to be so. It is about using willpower to change our mind and to keep it changed. That's what we use willpower for. We decide what we will have, we change our mind, and we keep it changed. And we use our will. We use our power of observation to notice when our mind is straying and to bring it back. Nope, that's not the truth. Up until now it may have been that way, but that is no longer my truth. So how do we know where to work? How do we know what to do? Where do we start? And it's very simple. You work at a kind of a general level. How is the flow of prosperity in your life? Do you have enough and plenty? If not, then there's a restriction, because the flow of God is unlimited. The flow of God's good is unlimited. I mean, the sun has been burning for billions of years. Only 2% of the sun's energy reaches this planet, and that is more than enough to sustain every bit of life as we know it. The sun is one of billions of stars that we know of. God's abundance is unlimited. So if we're not experiencing all of it that we wish, we can assume that there's an idea of lack, limitation, restriction somehow in our mind. And we can deliberately choose to pour ideas to the opposite into our consciousness, to remind ourselves that God is unlimited, to remind ourselves that there's nothing pleasing to God about withholding from us. It's the Father's good pleasure to give you the keys to the kingdom. The gifts have already been given. You must ask believing in your heart. All of those things that we're told in the New Testament. So if it's prosperity, we work on ideas of recognizing the abundance around us, recognizing the good around us, recognizing the plenty that is around us, but most importantly, recognizing that we are one with it. See, the greatest problem that we have is this idea of separation, this idea of duality. We left the garden in order to have this experience of the knowledge of good and evil, not the actuality of good and evil, the knowledge of good and evil. We can believe in separation, we can believe in lack, we can believe in limitation. And as long as we choose to believe in it, we get to experience it. And to get back into the garden, we have to get back past those ideas of separation. We have to get past the two angels in Jewish theology, the two were cherubim, and the two guards in the Buddhist theology. Same exact image. There's two guards at the gate, keeping us from re-entering. And of course, they are our desires and our fears. See, what would you do if you knew the horse you were riding couldn't fall down? Where would your fears be? What would you do if the good that your heart desired is already fulfilled? Your desires would become satiated. There'd be no lack, there'd be no want. So we come to a place then where we have to stop and say, I am the only thinker in my universe. There's a power in the universe that responds to me according to my belief. I am the only one who can change my beliefs. Now, how much time do I spend doing that? Really, how much time do I spend doing that? Out of the Silomar one year, Dr. Dennis Merritt Jones asked the audience to raise their hand. He said, how many people have a room in your home dedicated to cleaning your body? And of course, everybody has a bath or a shower, and they all raise their hand. He said, now how many people have a room in your home dedicated to cleaning your mind? And very few people raise their hand. How much time do you spend every day grooming your body? How much time do you spend every day grooming your mind? So what we have to realize is that this is something that requires deliberate attention, and as Dr. Holmes said, aggressive attention. We've got to stay with it. I think many times we decide that we want to have a different experience in our lives, and we keep that foremost in our consciousness for a couple days, maybe a week. And then after that, we go right back to our old ways. We have to stop doing that. We can't go back to our old ways. We have to change our mind. We have to keep it changed. And we have to keep it changed until the demonstration appears. And that's what Dr. Holmes tells us. Just keep your mind changed. Keep doing your treatment. There's a cumulative effect. He says you can't expect to treat for $1 million today and have it appear tomorrow, but you can expect over time to change your consciousness to accept the good that has been given. Are you really dedicated to that? Are you really dedicated to your growth, to changing your mind? Because that's what he's talking about. He's talking about incremental growth, day by day growth. I'm not the same person I was yesterday because I have grown today. I've grown in my realization of my oneness with God. So as we go through the three levels of consciousness, which Emma Curtis Hopkins defines as the material, the mental, and the mystical, when we are working at the level of the material, we tend to want physical things. We tend to want more money, better jobs, better houses, those kind of things. And there's nothing wrong with those. We need to understand there's nothing wrong with those. This sometimes we get caught up in teachers who will say, well, you shouldn't want those things because they're material. And what they're saying is material things are not spiritual things. And what we need to do is break down the barrier. We need to break down the barrier that says there's no difference between that which is spiritual and that which is material, any more than there's a difference between steam and ice. It is just a form and only the form. The second thing you will hear teachers say sometime is that you shouldn't have desires, because desire is literally the root of all evil. And they're right. They're absolutely right in terms of desire can lead us astray. But there's a caveat there. To me, there's a lack of understanding there. And it was best explained to me one time by a Hindu philosopher, a kindly old gentleman in his 90s who was teaching classes on world religion. And he says, is the desire to have no desires still a desire? And he was speaking directly to the Western interpretation of, well, we shouldn't have any desires. No, we shouldn't have the desires that lead us astray. We shouldn't have the desires that separate us. Our desire should be for that which, as Dr. Holmes tells us, leads to a greater expression of life and of love and of truth and of beauty and harms no one or robs no one of anything. We desire to breathe because it's appropriate for our lives. We desire to drink because it's appropriate for our lives. And we desire to express God's life. And in order to do that, there are material needs that must be. So when we are working at level 1 consciousness, we tend to want to focus on the material things, and that's okay. But what happens is, because the only way we have our demonstration is to grow deeper in the realization that God is all there is, God has already given the gifts, there's nothing within the divine mind that withholds the gifts, and I must accept my relationship with that. And then our demonstrations start to come. But at some point, we move kind of out of that. We move out of that. We say, but why? Why? Who am I that God is mindful of me? Why does the divine mind care about me? What is my relationship with God? How loving are my relationships with other people? So at the second level, we start to become more interested in what we know and how we know it. And we become more interested in affection and in love and in kindness, and not just getting stuff, because getting stuff in itself is okay. There's nothing wrong with having what we want or need for life, but it becomes boring after a while. I remember watching a program one time about this is back in the 80s, about a man who made $1 million a day in the stock market, and they went and interviewed him, and he had literally like a hotel room that he had rented, and he had about 15 telephones in there, and all he did was he sat there and he made telephone calls all day long. I don't even think he had a computer. I think it was before computers. And he turned around and he said, yeah, he had done that for a while, and he got tired of it, and he stopped, and then somebody he knew asked him, they needed some money, could he go make them $1 million? And he said, sure. And he went and he did it for him. He says, anybody can do it. You know, anybody can go ahead and do it. He says, but after a while, it just gets boring. So if you could produce all the stuff in your life, all the physical stuff in your lives, then you start to ask, but what is the meaning of this? Why is this important? What is the deeper meaning of life? So at level 1, we can use this this power that responds to us according to our belief to bring into our lives that which we will give the mental equivalent of. We have to know a little bit about what it looks like. We can't be so general that we don't know what it looks like. I want stuff. And we can't be so specific that we limit the demonstration. It's got to be exactly this. So what is it that we want, and why do we want it? And typically when we come down to prosperity is we want enough and plenty. We want enough money in our lives to do the things that we want to do. That's what we want. we then start to think, well, maybe I need to have $1 million in the bank. Well, is your trust in your connection with the power of the divine to flow into your life what you need when you need it, or is your trust in the bank? Okay? Now your idea of limitation gets exposed to you. The second level, we are more interested in learning, and we can use the power to guide us and to lead us and to teach us and to bring us where we need to be in order to learn everything we need to learn in order to grow spiritually. And then at the third level, we get to the point where I'm not interested in stuff, and I'm not interested in learning. I just want to be at home with my beloved, and then our treatment becomes different. Just simply to know that God is, and that I am one with God, and that the love and the guidance and the experience of God is with me. As Emma Curtis Hopkins says, the I am inevitably wills and causes to be done that which ought to be done as me. Whatever needs must be are taken care of. I only want to be with God. So I invite you to consider then that life, this lifetime, is a journey of spiritual growth. That there is a law of attraction, and what basically it says is we attract into our lives whatever we have created the mental equivalent of, we have faith in. You and I are the only ones who can deliberately choose to create that mental equivalent or what we will have faith in. But it requires our attention. It requires our dedication. It requires our aggressive pursuit in that I won't stop until I have it. I won't let go of the angel until I've had my blessing. I won't give up on changing my consciousness until it's changed. I won't do it for 2 or 3 days and then move on to something else. I will stay with this until the demonstration is made. All of the power of the universe is with us. The horse you're riding on cannot fail, cannot fall. If you believe it cannot. Anything that you wish to experience in your life, you can experience, because the power is like your rich uncle. It's always waiting to support you. It's always waiting to help you. But the choice is yours. The choice is mine. Unless and until we sit down and decide to consciously work with the power, we have abdicated our responsibility, and we are allowing the power to work with whatever happens to be in our subconscious. You know, it's kind of like having a membership at the gym. It doesn't do you any good to have the card in your wallet or the tag on your keychain. You have to get up and go. All of God is for us. None of God is against us. All of the power of the universe is waiting, ready, willing, and able to help us. But it cannot force itself upon us. So this week, I invite you to use this power to awaken within yourself a greater desire to use the power, a greater desire to know more of God, a greater desire to experience the relationship that your thoughts have with God, and continue to do so. Continue to do so until you feel that desire increasing, till you feel the change in your lives. We came here to discover our spiritual nature, and this is the perfect environment to do it. By changing our thoughts and watching our environment change, we get the feedback that we need to grow. So let's grow. And so it is.